You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 410 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. On today's show, I'm talking about Hillary Clinton's suggestion that Tulsi Gabbard is some kind of Russian asset or Russian sympathizer set out to undermine the Democratic Party, I guess with the grand plot of trying to get Donald Trump reelected as president. So that's ridiculous, and I'll talk about that. Also want to talk about Julian Assange, who appeared in court yesterday, and, some bad things happened, so I'll talk about that in more detail. All right, everybody, please take the time to share the show or recommend it to people. You find it at thelibertarianinstitute.org. The show and the daily news roundup that I write are featured in the right-hand column of the homepage of that site. Subscribe to the show if you're new to it. Give it a rating and review. And if you want to, really help out the show, you do that at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. All right, kind of embarrassing, but I got to start off the show with correcting myself. In the past week or so on the show, I've been talking about this Fox and Friends clip where I must have misheard Lindsey Graham basically say that there's 200 troops in southern Syria. What he says there is Israel, 200-something deployment of troops in southern Syria, and kind of goes on. And so I had kind of read it as like a comma or a colon saying that, there's 200 Israeli troops in Syria there. But I guess it's kind of clarified later on that he means that this American mission and I guess then American troops. And so it doesn't look like, at least, from Lindsey Graham's reporting, there's Syrian or Israeli troops in Syria. Doesn't mean that, there's been other reports and accusations that there are Israeli forces in Syria. And so I suppose that is still possible. But, nothing confirmed it by this Lindsey Graham report. So I just wanted to go ahead and mention that. I know everybody tunes into the show because they want accurate, up-to-date foreign policy news. So when I get something wrong like that, it makes it difficult, but try to correct it as soon as I can to get you guys the most accurate information. So Assange's day in court, the reporting here is done by Craig Murray, and you can find this at antiwar.com, who's a friend of Julian Assange and a former UK ambassador and whistleblower. And he, was in attendance for this court hearing, and this is what he described. That Assange struggled to answer simple questions, like saying his name and date of birth. And then also there's reports of him giving a statement that is somewhat confused. It's not completely incoherent, but at the same time, it is definitely not, the statement of an articulate, brain. And Craig Murray points out, and this is something that I've observed with Julian Assange, that he's obviously a fairly intelligent man, and he's able to explain his point and his position very well. And so he's obviously suffering from, at the very least, some kind of health problems. Craig Murray, Julian Assange was not a big guy to begin with, has lost an estimate of, he says, 15 kilograms. So, that's not a good sign. We know that he was locked in the embassy for years on end and is now in even a more restrictive setting in solitary confinement in this UK prison. 20 plus hours a day locked in a cell, limited access to lawyers, visitors, only 45 minutes a day of exercise time. And apparently that's the only time he gets contact with other people. And I think they're mostly prisoners. So as it goes, it seems that Assange is in an increasingly desperate situation, where he needs to be freed. These kind of situations, the solitary confinement, and I'll get into the injustice that he's facing in a minute, but this is really going to be something that breaks a human brain and really is going to, harm his long-term facilities and everything like that. If there isn't some permanent damage that hasn't already been done with, the kind of rough just health, physical health and mental health and the poor conditions that, these international governments like the UK, Ecuador, the US have put Assange through over these past few years. And that's actually what the US Rapporteur on Torture said. Craig Murray also in his piece weighs in not only as a friend of Julian Assange, but as somebody who's worked with torture victims, and that's part of his whistleblowing history. And basically says, like, hey, when I look at Julian Assange, I see some of these characteristics that I saw in those torture victims. And, from somebody who's, I guess, actually experienced somebody, after torture with all that PTSD and understands, what that's like, saying that, he sees the same thing in Assange, it seems very significant and very scary to me. So I really hope that something will happen, anything will happen, that this guy who is a journalist who's just released information to the people of the world, mostly about the crimes of their governments, is just going to be locked away and will suffer and die in prison as a political prisoner. Something like Erwin Schiff, the father of libertarian political commentator Peter Schiff, who, for reasons of publishing a book and tax reasons, ends up dying chained to a prison bed. And you maybe end up seeing the same thing out of Assange if things are going the way they are. Part of the reason I say that is it doesn't look like he's going to get anything remotely like a fair extradition trial in the UK. So Craig Murray describes a situation where you have, the team of UK prosecutors who are, I guess, going to argue for the extradition of Assange to the U.S. And then you actually had U.S. Diplomats or lawyers or officials or something behind them, and two more Americans in the room that were advising their UK counterparts. It is then described by Murray as pretty much anything the government puts forward is approved by the judge, and all requests by the defense were essentially blocked. So who could be surprised, right? This seems to be how generally the courts work. All the same paychecks are coming from the government. So, this counts for the judge and the prosecutor. So it seems like they have a reason to maybe be on the same team a little bit here. And that certainly seems to be the situation in this case, that they both would like to see Assange sent back to the United States. A couple of the, kind of requests and I believe points made by the Assange team that I think are really significant is, one, they pointed out that the U.S. was working with this Spanish company, I believe, to spy on Assange while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy for all those years, including on the conversations that he had with his lawyers. And from the reporting I understand, most of Assange's assets ended up in the hands of the United States. And so this would include any kind of notes he had in preparation for any kind of, future legal battle, either extradition to the U.S. or actually just going to court in the U.S. And so these seem like they should be some kind of privileged, legal conversations and documents that should have been violated here. So, something should be done to rectify that, if not just completely throwing out the extradition request. There's also the issue that Julian Assange isn't in the greatest mental state. So, providing him with the medical care he needs, which if you're suffering from, a lack of exposure to human beings, is exposure to more human beings, and removing this guy from solitary confinement, torture conditions, and giving him a chance to prepare his defense, would be things that you had to see. So they're requesting extensions, so they could, prepare a better defense, and that was then denied by the judge. So let's all set up, put in motion to just kind of railroad Julian Assange here and ship him right off to Virginia. Well, on a little bit of a lighter note here, Hillary Clinton, the just absolute joke at this point, and I really hope that's the way people see her more and more frequently, is just this huge joke that should be just laughed and mocked at all day long. But here, Hillary is on some podcast because apparently somebody somewhere still respects her position. Actually, she's been doing a lot of speaking lately, and people are speculating that she may run again. But anyways, on this podcast, she says that, the Russians are looking at somebody that they would like to run third party, and this would essentially be done in coordination with the Trump campaign in order to undermine the Democratic Party. Hillary uses the pronoun she, describing this person. And so when you look at the females left in the race, you see, I think, the major outsider being Tulsi Gabbard, and everybody assumes and knows that's who Hillary Clinton is talking about. So, the headlines and the summary of this is Hillary Clinton alleges that Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset. I immediately found this to be hilarious. This is an old lady who's apparently lost her mind. I guess maybe I shouldn't laugh so much at Alzheimer's if that's what it is. No, but, she's obviously this bitter old lady who can't accept that she lost the election because she's unlikable, and she made it so that even Donald Trump could get elected somehow, and can't accept that it's on her. And so she blames Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, this elaborate conspiracy that somehow this time around must include Tulsi Gabbard. And in part because Tulsi Gabbard is very critical of the Hillary Clinton kind of foreign policy narrative and this whole Russiagate narrative that Hillary Clinton invented. And so to me, that Hillary Clinton is that bitter that she's going to attack Tulsi Gabbard 3 years after the election. You know how much it must just eat out of her that she lost to Donald Trump every day for her to go on a podcast and say that. And so in that way, I find this absolutely hilarious. And in some respect, I do think the correct response at this point is to mock the Russiagators. I mean, myself, to a lesser extent, but so many other people, like Aaron Mate, Michael Tracy, Scott Horton, who covered it the whole time all along. All the people like that, Matt Taibbi, have completely disproven and debunked all the fake narratives that have been going on for the past 3 years. And, they have nothing new to offer. Robert Mueller fell flat on his face. And so at this point, we should just laugh at people who make these kind of assertions. But there are some kind of nuanced points to this that are kind of important and do give a good window to talk about why you shouldn't be a warmonger. Also want to talk about Tulsi's response. I think somebody in the Scott Horton group, Reddit group, posted there, Tulsi seems to have taken her gloves off. So yeah, she really fired back well at Hillary Clinton with, I think, one of the best opening lines ever, calling her the queen of the warmongers. So for a couple of reasons, I think this is really important, that Hillary Clinton is a very establishment candidate and a very well-known kind of figure. And so for her to attack Tulsi Gabbard, even if Hillary Clinton isn't in the race yet, maybe one day she will be, but it does, I guess, kind of have a punching down effect. And then Tulsi Gabbard, kind of taking this swing back at Hillary Clinton, I think really delivering a pretty solid blow. It seems to be something that should kind of benefit Tulsi Gabbard overall. That Tulsi Gabbard highlighted, though, the warmonger issue here. And I guess her seeing that's where her and Hillary are the most different is really critical to understanding, hopefully, who Tulsi Gabbard is and what she wants to run her campaign on, which hopefully is ending some of these wars. I will say Tulsi, could have really made a statement standing up and voting no to that dumb House resolution condemning Trump for moving a couple troops in Syria. But she at least didn't vote with the rest of her Democrat colleagues for that resolution. She just abstained. I do want to take a second to talk about how ridiculous it is to suggest that, being a third party, so having a different view than the two major parties in a democracy that Hillary Clinton is always saying is so important, is somehow equivalent to, helping her standing up for, or, at the very least serving the interests of a foreign power, even if it's not intentional, that's what that is. That's absurd. You can have more than two parties in the United States. There's 300 something million people here, Hillary Clinton, just because somebody wants to run third party, especially since, the two major parties we have are very kind of established and have their own internal structures to make sure certain kind of people only get to have the opportunity to be president. That doesn't seem very undemocratic or un-American to me. You also have the issue here that you just can't help but notice on the face of it, that Hillary Clinton is asserting that Tulsi Gabbard, who is a major, I believe, in the Hawaiian National Guard, and also, a woman who's been able to raise to that rank, but not only that, I believe she's of both a minority religion and race. It seems like if Donald Trump had said that, then it would have been really, really racist. And it's interesting that Hillary Clinton isn't, I guess, being held to that same standard, that how dare you question the allegiance of an American soldier to the United States who, is of, some kind of minority. Dave Smith, who I think does a pretty good job overall of political commentary, made one really important point here, and that is, if Tulsi Gabbard really could pit Hillary Clinton as her enemy, well, that's about the best tactical move that any politician could make, is, pit the most unlikable person in a room and say that, they're the worst person. And in this case, since it's Hillary Clinton, she's actually right. and pointing out that that's the worst person. And it may be a very successful strategy for Tulsi Gabbard to come, and it could be something that pushes her to vocalize this non-interventionist, position that she takes most of the time. Not perfect on the war issue, but certainly I think one of the best chances, in the race of current candidates to end some wars. I also think she's a legitimate candidate to beat Donald Trump. When you look at the DNC field, Hillary Clinton, and one important thing I want to point out, anybody who thinks Hillary Clinton running for president in 2020, is a good idea, just remember that what she is going to run on is, I beat Donald Trump the first time around. She's talking about the popular vote. And if it wasn't for Russian interference, I would have won the first time. And so she's going to run against Donald Trump on Russian interference. She's going to get obliterated. It would be the biggest gift to Donald Trump. In fact, if anybody in the Democrat Party was really looking to help Donald Trump, it seems like they would make this race all about Russiagate, which is an obviously fake narrative at this point. But Tulsi, because she didn't buy into the Russiagate nonsense, and because I just had this feeling that her being a major in the National Guard means that she's dealt with, the kind of men that Donald Trump is, and won't have this overly serious reaction to him that's going to make you look kind of silly or foolish the way you respond to him, the way Hillary Clinton did so many times. And I think in the way you see that she responded to Hillary Clinton, definitely uses social media well. And I just, a real good, I think, contrast to Donald Trump. So if the Democratic Party wants to win, I don't know. I think that's be one of the first people that I would put against Donald Trump. Certainly not Bernie, who just had a heart attack. Biden, who can't remember Obama's name, is constantly saying stupid stuff. Elizabeth Warren, say some positive things about her on war issues occasionally. Seems to be a pretty kind of establishment-ish progressive Democrat, and of course has this legacy of not only saying that she was a Native American, but using it on a couple occasions to get places in life when it turns out that it's not actually true. It is a real stain on her legacy that I'm guessing Donald Trump is going to exploit back to reelection. All right, just some quick other news stories I want to run through before I wrap up. Justin Trudeau has won re-election in Canada. Some other notes from the election are he doesn't, I guess, have a majority in his party. Will have to rely on more left-wing parties. Also, the separatists in Quebec apparently did quite well and tripled their numbers from, I believe, like 10 to 30-something seats. Protests continue in Chile over the public transportation issue. So far, 15 people have been killed and 2,600 have been arrested. In Afghanistan, I guess the U.S. commander is saying that 2,000 U.S. troops have left Afghanistan so far in 2019. Not, I guess maybe they're rotating them out and not replacing them or something like that. Because at least as far as I read, haven't been big announcements of U.S. troops leaving. Not sure if they're redeployed to other places in the Middle East or if these guys actually got to come home. But it would put the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan closer to 12,000 than 14,000. We also had the Pentagon saying they're drawing up plans to exit Afghanistan. And I guess this is in response to Donald Trump leaving Syria. And even though, we have the Pentagon saying that, oh no, this isn't the same thing. The Kurds were a short-term ally. Turkey was a NATO ally invading. This is different. Maybe they're concerned that Donald Trump was really serious about withdrawing troops from these places, and they want to have, solid plans in place for exiting. A couple stories about Iraq, kind of dealing with Syria here. The first one is the U.S. troops. I said about 100 vehicles I thought I saw leave in one report, and then about 180 American troops, I think was some kind of official number, have moved from eastern Syria to western Iraq. The Iraqi government said, these guys are just in transit. We are not approving them staying. So while it may be kind of the intention to redeploy them to western Iraq for the same mission, they may not end up staying very long. Hopefully that means they're on a plane back to the United States. All right, the last thing I want to mention is some fighting has flared up in and around Kashmir. Within Kashmir, there were a couple instances where militants were killed by Indian forces, or civilians were killed in exchange of fire between militants and Indian forces. I think about 5 people total in the past week. We also had clashes between the Pakistani and the Indian armies, and at the very least, 2 soldiers and 1 civilian were killed, although I've read reports being a little bit higher. So keep an eye on that. Again, India and Pakistan, as my listeners know, are, nuclear power armed states, and we have to be, concerned that any conflict there could go nuclear and, kill millions of people very, very quickly. All right, that's where I'm ending the show. Hope everybody's enjoying it. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org at KYAAALE, and Facebook, there's a private group, Foreign Policy Focus.